NCECA feels like a lifetime ago, when actually it's only been about 2 months. And so instead of counting these past few weeks by social media time, where 1 week clearly feels like an eternity, I'm going to stay rooted in the reality and share with you a bit of an expanded version, or rather, my reflections after my chat with Paul Blaze from the Potter's Cast that we recorded live at NCECA back on episode 335. Frankly, as I've intended to do for the past few weeks. But compiling your thoughts combined with the usual hustle of life, and here we are, 2 months later, finally getting it together. Hello, my name is Rebecca, and I am a recovering perfectionist. To the point, though, when I sat down with Paul in a packed room at NCECA, we hit upon a lot of business subjects very quickly. Frankly, just one of the questions he threw my way could have been its own entire episode. So today I'm expanding on a few of those subjects in this solo episode. And if there are still questions you had from that chat, send me over an email to podcast@makers-playbook.com and I'll queue up another follow-up episode as well. Because if there's one thing to say that would sum all of these conversations up, it's that just about every decision when it comes to your business or a side hustle on the nights and weekends, full-time gig, whatever, it doesn't matter. Nearly every decision you are going to have to make is interconnected to every other decision you're making. But before we get into all that complexity, a quick word from our sponsor.
Hello, I'm Bryce, Account Manager and Sales Solutions Supervisor at Amico Brett, providing you with the best customer service in ceramics. This episode is brought to you by Amico Brett. Find Amico glazes and equipment at your local distributor. Welcome to Clay, and thank you for listening.
Welcome to the Maker's Playbook, the show where we talk all about what it's really like to make a living from the things you make. I'm your host, seasoned entrepreneur of 13 years, Rebecca Ikes Kara. So how you choose to photograph your work is generally most successful when it's connected to the style of your ceramics work as well, which in turn is connected to where it makes the most sense to share that work you are making or sell that work, which connects to who you think the audience is for your work, etc., etc., etc. Finding your unique style in clay, then, is connected to learning how to photograph, which connects to learning how to share and promote your work, leading you to make sure the pricing is in alignment with your brand experience, so on and so forth. If I could find a non-copyrighted version of the children's skeleton song to add to this episode right now, I would. You know what I'm talking about. The knee bone's connected to the thigh bone's connected to the hip bone. Anyway, you get the idea. But let me just pause for a second on all of this interconnectedness before we keep going, and first say, you do not need to have it all figured out before you get started. And I realize that probably sounds pretty contradictory to what I just said. So in case you weren't totally listening and this seems a little confusing, I'm going to repeat it. Because I know I needed to hear this multiple times to believe it when I first started my own business. You do not need to have all of this interconnectedness figured out before you get started. Here's the beauty of the state of technology and the internet, my friends. You can try all of this out pretty much for free. There is nothing wrong with starting out by throwing up a few photos of your work on Etsy and seeing what happens. Heck, that's what I did. You don't need to obsess over the keywords to use or what search terms someone might be using to find your mug. I do that stuff now because the number of mugs we sell is sort of directly related to groceries and dog food. But if you're just getting started, if you're just testing the waters a little bit, stop overthinking it and just put up a photo already. In fact, I'd actually recommend that before you go through the process of investing in making your own website. Are there downsides to Etsy? Of course. Lord have mercy, do I have stories. But do those stories, as crazy as they are, also teach me some super important things about customer service and non-potters' expectations of what it's like to buy handmade pottery? Absolutely. You do not need a business plan to start an Etsy shop. Heck, you don't even need to fully commit to a brand name or anything like that. Your name Pottery works just fine. And if you hate the idea of your name as the business, then how about your neighborhood name, Pottery? Or your region Pottery? Or your street name Pottery? I don't know. Just stop overthinking it. Anything can always be changed later on. And the odds of picking something perfectly the very first time are pretty slim. As important as the interconnectedness of it all can become down the line, especially if maybe something's not going the way you want it to. If right now you are in the phase of simply dipping your toes in the water, testing it out, seeing what happens, then a lot of the time, all this extra stuff, the photography style, the logos, the branding, the packaging, the website platform, the shipping, the boxes, etc., etc., etc. It's all just stuff we can use as an excuse to hide. It's all just stuff that we use to not start. So as much as I'm doing this solo episode to expand upon a lot of the subjects that I barely scratched the surface on while recording at NCECA, I want you to remember for the rest of this conversation that at the end of the day, you just need to start. You can't research everything in order to avoid messing up. You will mess up, and it probably won't be as bad as you think. I definitely have. But the only way you can really and truly start to learn what works best for you, your unique life, your unique goals and dreams, is to start and to make changes as you learn from your actual personal experiences. Honestly, it's all any of us are doing. Okay, so that's point number 1, a bit in backwards order of how we discussed them over on episode 335, but no worries. So, in my chat with Paul at NCECA, we talked a lot about finding your customers and about the attempts at researching to find those people. But ultimately, when it comes down to it, you simply have to put yourself out there and remind yourself, unfortunately, that it won't always work. But this is the important part. If it doesn't work out, that's not necessarily a reflection of you or your work or your worth or your work's worth. But if you try going to a new market this summer, for example, and get told by too many people that your stuff is too expensive and you don't sell anything, that does not actually mean that you should discount your work. Maybe it does, but maybe it simply means that this specific market wasn't a good fit for you. Maybe it wasn't in the right neighborhood to attract the type of people who would be interested in your style. Maybe the market themselves advertises in a way that creates the expectation for people to assume things will be a certain price range or on discount. Maybe someone was just having a really bad day and annoyingly took it out on you. It's hard to say, but it's why I will go back to what you've heard me say before. Owning a business for yourself is constantly repeating the scientific process. Observe what's happening, come up with what you suspect is the reason, test that reason, gather data from that test, analyze that data, make a new hypothesis, test again, repeat, repeat, repeat. But as I just described the scientific method here, I don't want you getting stuck in the vision of some complex multivariable testing process where you have to analyze data in a pristine room in white lab coat or something. This can be something as simple as deciding, you know what? I think my audience spends most of their time on Instagram. So I'm going to commit to posting 3 times a week on Instagram for 3 months with the assumption that that means I'll gain followers by doing it. You take note of how many followers you have at the beginning. You commit and you do actually post 3 times a week for 3 months. And then you see how many followers you have at the end. That's a hypothesis, a test, and analyzing the results of that test. Not nearly as complex as it originally sounded, right? Now, one other point on this hypothetical market experience, which frankly is not actually hypothetical at all, and literally happened recently to one of our community members. And let me tell you, seeing our community rally around this maker after a really rough day was literally a living and breathing example of why I have been so excited to see more makers join us online. Because I understand to my core how disheartening it can feel to have someone tell you, to your face or online, your work isn't worth that much money. I've been there. And unfortunately, it can be a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. If someone comes up to you at a market or comments on the internet and says that what you're selling is too expensive, we start to feel bad, or maybe we start to feel a little uncertain. Our mood changes. How we show up to the conversation with the next person who walks into our booth, whether literally in person or on the internet, is a little different than the last conversation. That new person senses the energy or possibly the lack of excitement that we're putting out. Our feelings of uncertainty get passed off to them in a way, which then contributes to the fact that they don't buy anything because they feel uncertain. And this cycle perpetuates itself. Selling your own work often can be a deep and difficult lesson in acting. Yes, you heard me correctly. I said acting. Acting confident when you don't necessarily feel confident. Acting happy when you're feeling disappointed. Acting energetic when you've been standing on your feet for 2 days in a row and all you really want to do is curl up on the couch. And acting patient when what you really want to do is tell that person on Etsy to F right off with their craziness. Hypothetically, obviously. But here's the thing, and you've heard me say this before too. So apparently this episode I should have titled Rebecca's Greatest Hits of Business Advice. Both of these things, the need to constantly observe and test and retest ideas, alongside acting when we aren't feeling so great, they both suck to do by yourself and can drive us down a pretty dark rabbit hole. It's the prime recipe for imposter syndrome and the comparison monsters to pop up their nasty little heads and send us straight to doom scrolling on Instagram, or totally wallowing on the couch for too long. Now, a healthy bit of wallowing is okay. We do, after all, need to be honest with our feelings, but we also need a supportive, gentle, loving, yet swift and firm kick in the butt when it's time to stop licking our wounds and get up off that couch. It would be quite foolish of me to not mention at this point that this kind of support, the kind where the other person genuinely understands in their gut what it feels like, but also gently pulls you off the couch and splashes a little cold water on your face. Well, that's what our community is for. Like I said, I recently saw these 65 makers rally together around a member who experienced a terrible market with some truly rude people. And then a couple of weeks later, that same group of makers was able to celebrate alongside another maker who was feeling all of the nerves about an upcoming market and found great success. I don't think I'm taking too much credit for our amazing communal support when I make the assumption that having a couple dozen people remind you that you're going to do a great job when you're trying out something new, like displaying your work at a market. I don't think it's a big leap to assume that that cheer squad contributed to this particular maker's success. Contributed to this particular maker's success, having the energy to act her way through at the start of the market with all the confidence and the positive energy she deserved. We all know celebrating is more fun with friends, but we forget that in our dark moments, and I've had them, or rather still have them, in those moments, it's those friends who are ready to pop open a bottle of bubbles and celebrate with you that are also crucially needed when things don't go well. Not for unrealistic, good vibes only nonsense. That's not real life. But instead, to balance both understanding alongside a little gentle encouragement to keep going. It's a tricky balance to find, and I am beyond lucky that our core members in the community who have been helping grow this beautiful place online for about over the last year understood this themselves on their own and have fostered such a caring and safe space for others. I'm going to get back to the other business subjects that I wanted to hit upon. I'm rambling a little too long here now about the community, but just to say, if what I'm sharing is striking a chord with you, if like Francesco and I, you've signed up for your first in-person markets ever in the coming months and are feeling a little anxious, or if you keep overanalyzing every website platform out there instead of simply starting, the community might just be the place for you. So you can read more about it, learn directly from our members what it's all about at makersplaybook.com/community. All right, enough about that. Back to the NCECA subjects. We also talked about market research, not just in person, but trying to find your potential customers online, like Instagram. And here's something I didn't get a chance to say specifically about Instagram. I talked a lot about how to consider tangential spaces where your customers might interact online. Thinking of other brands that aren't pottery specifically, but have a similar vibe to you. Clothing brands, home goods, coffee shops, whatever. And that does work. But if the idea of naturally and authentically trying to comment on other stores' posts in the hopes of connecting with potential customers feels totally weird, here's something else to consider. Did you know that hashtags should be used like the search words you type into Google? Let me explain. While using hashtag #MakersGonnaMake might get you plenty of other potters to connect with and chat about cones and firing temperatures, there aren't too many non-makers typing that in to find their next set of cereal bowls, for example. However, if someone is looking for a unique piece to finish a recently redone living room, she might type into that Discover tab of Instagram, handmade vases or minimalist decor. And if I put hashtag handmade vase on a recent post of vases, obviously, well, I might just get lucky and that person could see my post. The reason it's so easy to find other potters online is because the way we share things is, of course, naturally, the way other potters think too. I would be willing to make a very strong bet that a non-potter person looking to buy a handmade mug has no idea what hashtag reduction fired or hashtag cone 10 oxidation means, let alone is typing it into a search. For lack of better words here, what I'm trying to say is that you have to remember to think like a normal person. If you are trying to grow an audience online for the purpose of currently or maybe one day possibly selling your work, you need to talk to that audience. In other words, you need to think like that audience. Yes, at first, this is really hard. Yes, like with all of this stuff, over time it takes practice. But also, yes, it will get easier. Now, I could write an entire course on speaking to your audience and how your ideal audience doesn't necessarily actually exist. But you can train people to become your ideal audience. So, I'm going to pause on this subject for now in order to get a couple of other points I wanted to expand upon after listening back to my NCECA recording. So, apologies for the cliffhanger moment. And just remember, when you are thinking about using Instagram hashtags, think about who you actually want to see your posts. Okay? So, the other major overarching theme from my time at NCECA was that you can choose to add complexity as you go along. This is what I started this whole episode with. Everything is indeed interconnected, all the decisions that we're making, but that doesn't mean you need to have every single thing figured out in order to get started. Right now, if you are just getting started, throw up an Etsy shop. Maybe consider getting an Instagram account or even just using your personal one. And that's it. If you've heard my past episode about building an email list, which is episode number 322 in case you were curious, well, guess what? You can start that simply with a spreadsheet. Ask people to DM you their email address if you're on Instagram, and then just manually copy and paste them into the spreadsheet. Sure, it takes a little bit more of your time, but if the idea of learning the technology of setting up an automated system is stopping you from starting an email list, then just start manually. These things do not have to be complex. As you grow, as you learn what you like and don't like, where you want to go with this crazy dream, then you can start to add in more details. Because then you'll have more information to make those decisions with. Let me give you the Maker's Playbook growth from the last 2 years as an example to this, as well as all the other subjects we've talked about in this episode and the original NCECA recording. I started the Maker's Playbook with the Instagram account I had been using while studying ceramics in Italy. At the time, it was called Purposeful Pottery, which was the name I had made up to start selling my hobby work that I made out of a community studio in Chicago that I sold on Etsy. I didn't want my name associated with it because obviously I already very much had a full-time business with my name, which is Rebecca Marie Photography. Now, this very podcast was started with my headphones that had a microphone built into them and a free podcast hosting platform. Then I made a website on a pretty cheap platform. Then, what many of you don't know is I tried to teach online and it was an epic failure. I had 3 people sign up. But what I learned was what worked and what didn't. I wound up doing some one-on-one coaching to teach photography and business to individual makers instead of groups. And through that, I learned how to talk about what I was offering in a way that actually made sense to the makers that I knew I could help. I listened to the things I was hearing from others, and I participated in groups online. And guess what? I realized the people most interested in what I was teaching were not actually the people I originally thought they would be. Most of the makers that have taken what is now the Maker's Photography Styling System, which is the second version of my online teaching that has actually worked, most of the makers taking that course are not the 20-somethings who are wanting to go full-time with their craft and know that they need photos for social media, like I thought they would be. In fact, most of the people who have taken my 6-week course or attended the one-day in-person workshops I just did in Australia, most of them are between 40 and 65. They're side hustling, they're raising little ones and don't have a lot of free time on their hands, or they're recently coming back to ceramics after having taken a couple of decades away to do other things with life, have their families, different careers, and now they're in Act 2, as I like to call it, of what their life looks like. So, as things grew, I got a new microphone from a friend who started helping me do a little bit of editing to the episodes here on the podcast, which made me feel more confident about the shows. So then I, in turn, started posting more regularly to Instagram, which frankly ebbs and flows still to this day, but that's a different conversation. After that, I started using a software program for my email list rather than the manual spreadsheets. 9 months after starting, I launched the Makers Photography Styling System, as you know it now, to an initial cohort of 30 people. The next time it was 60 people and has remained at 60 people every time we've opened the doors. But we didn't have 60 students at one time until a full year after I had started. Plus, the community that I was talking about earlier and the slightly more complex online software system that hosts all of those beautiful conversations and relationships supporting each other, well, that didn't come into being until over a year and a half later. And once again, directly grew out of the one-on-one conversations I was having with makers in my email inbox, that I recognized those conversations could grow into so much more fruitful, life-giving dialogue if other people could chime in as well. However, I should stop here and draw a more accurate timeline of all of this, because I didn't have the technological know-how of building a website, or better yet, the comfort of being uncomfortable, figuring out new things and working through mistakes pretty publicly. I didn't have those skills until after 13 years of being self-employed. I credit the growth that we've seen here on the Maker's Playbook in the last 2 years, which is a pretty short period of time, the nearly 2,000 of you who listen to this show every week, the over 7,000 of you that now follow me on Instagram, which is a little crazy to say, and over 200 makers that have already taken the Makers Photography Styling System course within the past 2 short years. I credit all of that, which has happened relatively quickly, to the lessons I learned the 11 years prior, to the many failed new business attempts, like when a friend and I tried to start a stock photo company years ago, or when I launched a second photography brand way too early before I was actually prepared to truly grow and support a full team. On the photography side of things, I have changed the logo and branding design 4 times over the last 13 years. And I mean like major changes, the design, the color, everything, the fonts. I have fully overhauled my entire website for photography at least 6 times in the last 13 years, with plenty of small tweaks in between. My pricing for photography has changed on average about once per year until last year. I'm sharing all of these historical numbers to try and drive home the point that the most certain thing about business, whether you are side hustling or full-time, is that you will always need to be learning something new. And just as is true with life, the other certainty is that things will change. My greatest piece of advice to anyone who's trying to start out making a living from the things they make is this: you have to practice getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. While the internet often shows us each other's big, sparkly accomplishments, how you actually get to those moments, those big occasions, as annoying as it sounds to say out loud, is simply by putting one foot in front of the other. The website of your dreams gets built by setting aside a couple of hours each day, or maybe even once a week, over and over and over again until it's finished. You hit that oh-so-popular goal of 10,000 followers on Instagram by posting consistently, engaging with others, and learning how to use the platform to your advantage. Which, spoiler alert, generally means working with the algorithm, not trying to hack it. You sell more of your work because you keep practicing talking to non-potters about your work. It might not feel like it right now, but bit by bit, day by day, you are learning new skills, getting better at them, and putting that necessary foot in front of the other foot. And on the days that it doesn't feel like it, well, come chat with the other makers inside of the community. That's part of what we're there for. Because no one gets through the arduous, long, boring phases of growth by sheer personal grit and determination. Trust me. I can guarantee you, behind every online bro telling you to get up at 4 a.m. and hustle till you make it, I bet there is an entire network of resources, i.e. people, supporting that person, cooking their dinners, folding their laundry, so that they can simply magically crush it. Using air quotes here. If you couldn't sense through your headphones, I'm rolling my eyes at the hustle and grind culture, and that is exactly the opposite of our conversations inside the community. Just to be clear. Now, don't get me wrong, you'll have to work hard, and occasionally there will be some late nights or early mornings. But on the whole, I firmly believe if we support one another, we can build a business that supports our lives first. If any of this struck a chord with you, or if there's a particular subject you'd love to hear more about, I'd really love to know. So send me a DM on Instagram at The Makers Playbook, or a good old-fashioned email to podcast@makers-playbook.com and let me know. As is true with the community is true with the podcast. While I have plenty of ideas, I actually want to know from you what you're interested in, so that we can make these resources helpful for all of us, rather than just my own brain. If you love the idea of having a support network of colleagues to talk to about all things mud and clay and glaze and side hustling or full-time business leaps, well, we would love it if you checked out the community to see if it might be the right place for you. You can hear directly from other makers and learn more all about what's going on by visiting makersplaybook.com/community. And the added perk is that our community memberships are an amazing source of support for the creation of this very podcast, as is the help from our sponsor, Amoco.
Hello, I'm Bryce, Account Manager and Sales Solutions Supervisor at Amoco Brett, providing you with the best customer service in ceramics. This episode is brought to you by Amoco Brett. Find Amoco glazes and equipment at your local distributor. Welcome to Clay, and thank you for listening.
Audio post-production of this podcast is made possible by help from Christy Kotzfan, with promotional material assistance from Queenie Maliki. The Makers Playbook podcast is recorded on the original homelands of the Potawatomi, Ho-Chunk, and Menominee people, where the people of Wisconsin's sovereign Anishinaabe, Ho-Chunk, Menominee, Oneida, and Mohican nations remain present. Until next time, my friends, go get back to making your dreams a reality. Because together, we've got this.